Okay, so I thought I'd go a little bit further in the game. We tested the controller, one of the joysticks on the controller. So I'm going to test at least one of the buttons. So I'm going to have this is actually a coin, was a coin and another set of test images. So I'm going to use, it looks kind of like a fireball. So I'm going to have the character just kind of fling fireballs, and I'll probably bring in a side character to interact with those. That way there's a completed game. Uh, Another character we can hit with fireballs. But for now, I want to go ahead and hit that the character to throw fireballs. But before we do that, I'd like to set a fallback. Um, right now, everything's set for the controller, and we have some logic that will work uh, in different languages. We just type the same logic in different syntax, and if it connects, then our controller, the COM attribute of our controller will be set to the serial port. Otherwise, that COM attribute is going to be set to none. So it'd be nice to have a fallback in here so that we could use the key presses instead of if the controller is not plugged up. So I'm going to go ahead and work that in here. I'll start down here in the events. Well, I'll make the method first because this method we have to move the, whoops, didn't mean to collapse that. This method we put here to move the player reads the joystick directly. So if we copy that and make a modified version for a keyboard in the event that the controller is not plugged up, so I'll call that player keyboard controller. And we won't be able to read the controller, so I'm just going to pass some values in. And I'll just call them left, down, right, and up, which the ASDW, the standard keyboard keys for that, is what I think I'll use here. And with a key press, it's either pressed or not. So that's either a 1, a -1, or a 0, where left and down would be the negative and right and up would be the positive. So we can just replace that value we're getting from the controller with either left, or duplicate this line to make that right, or for our y value, which is subtraction assignment instead of addition assignment, to adjust that positive up for the y that's easier to think about, with the negative up for y that screens are set up. So that's either going to be y is either up or down. Duplicate that line. And so we'll take in a 1 depending on which key is pressed and multiply it by the speed to move the player again. And then a key press is going to be an event. So we can add that to our event list here. So if the event, for everything in the event list, if it's not quit, then we can check and see if event.type is equal to PyGame.keyDown. And if it is, then we can sort through and see which key it is. Oh, I guess we need one more condition here, though. Before we check that, we want to make sure the controller the COM object of the controller is none. So if the controller, the port is set to none, and the event is a key down, then that means the joystick's not hooked up and a key was pressed. So that's when we want to control our characters. So then we can just check and see which key it was. So then we check if event.key is equal to the PyGame constant K underscore A. So capital K underscore, that's all our letter keys. So K underscore A is an A key. So if it's that, then we'll call that player keyboard control method. And A is typically left, so we want to pass in a -1, which will mark the left spot, and then everything else will be zeros. 0, 0, 0. And then we can copy that for our other 3 keys. So copy, paste, paste, paste. And I guess we could do it either way. I'm going to go ahead and make these elifs so that it just checks 1 on each pass of the game, each frame of the engine. And remember, it's running at 60 frames per second, so it'll come back around pretty quickly. So if it's not an A, then it could be an S, a D, or a W. And let's see, so S is down, so we went left down, so our second one needs to be a -1 here. A D is to the right, which was the third parameter, so our third argument needs to be a +1 to represent the right. And for a W, that would be up, so a +1 as the fourth argument to represent up. So if the controller is not hooked up, then we'll listen for key presses, just the A, S, D, and W right now. And if we move this way, then we don't want to move this way, so we'll need an if statement here. So we'll only call the other one if player controller.com. We want not. I always write this kind of backwards, so I'll wrap this in parentheses and then put the not out front. So if not controller is none. Now remember, with none we have to use is. So if the controller is not none, then we want to call the joystick controls. So I'm going to plug up the joystick and give both of these a test. There's still one slight problem, but we will address that in just a second. Before I open PowerShell to run this, I'm going to copy the address from over here in File Explorer. So come over here to PowerShell, change directory to this one, then call Python test1.py. It's going to check available ports, and right now the controller is hooked up, so it should register the controller. Yep, it connected, opened the game. Uh-oh, something crashed. Is not iterable. Oops, that was supposed to be is none instead of in none. None is not a collection we can walk through. We'll try this again. Open up our game, and I'll push the D key, S key, A key, W. Nothing happens on the key press, but the controller still moves like it did. We get a little more control with this. So now I'm going to close this, unconnect the joystick, and run that again to see if the keyboard works. And there is still one problem with the keyboard, but I thought it might be better to see it instead of just talking about the difference. Okay, so push the D key. Uh-oh. Typo again. The word keyboard. Player keyboard control. Oh, I missed an R. So I'll just paste these in here. Save that and give that another try. So no COM6, so definitely not going to connect. Unable to connect. This opens. And now when I press the key, notice it only moves one time. I'm holding down the W key, but it only moves once. Same thing. When I hold the key down, it only moves once. So let's address that. But we can see if I just tap the key, we can see it continually moves that direction. So the controller wasn't hooked up, so we were able to fall back to that. But to be able to hold the keys, we need to add something in up here with our initializations. There's this method called set repeat on the keys. So I'm going to come up here somewhere in all this initialization stuff and add in this PyGame.key.set_repeat. And this just means it's allowed to repeat. 1010 is what I usually pass in. One of them's delay and one of them's interval. I think it's delay and interval, but that's just how many milliseconds between the presses, basically. And both of them have to be pressed in. I've tried different things, one or the other, but delay and interval. And I always just pass in the same thing, 10 milliseconds for both of them, and that allows for keys to be held down. So if we scroll up and run that again, so the controller couldn't connect to that, but now our holding the S key moves the player a lot. So there's a fallback. If the controller's hooked up, we'll use that and get the finer control. But if the controller is not hooked up, it's going to automatically fall back to the keyboard. So using the same method, we set this up to return none on the COM port if it's not hooked up. So we just check that. So if it is none and there's a keyboard event, then use the keyboard event to move it. And then again, before we call the player control method, check and make sure that the controller is not none. So let's see, about 12 minutes on the video, so I'll add the button press and throw a fireball in the next video. 12 minutes seems good for that. So I'll be back shortly with a button press, but it'll follow the same logic. We'll just add it into the player control. A button press will create an instance of the fireball and start it moving. And then a fallback that if the controller is not hooked up, maybe the space bar or something will launch the fireball.